The rumours are contradictory, but it seems the Breen homeworld has frozen over. The species is having one hell of a time of it recently. We've learned more about them in the last few episodes than we did in the entire run of Deep Space Nine. The mask, now redesigned, has fallen. First introduced in name only in Star Trek The Next Generation, the Breen were something of a running gag or a red herring, according to writer Robert Hewitt Wolfe, but they would go on to become one of the most dastardly and least forthcoming aliens of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. There wasn't more to know about them than they were willing to tell. Their enigma was wrapped up in their refrigeration suits, which was, at least in Deep Space Nine, by design. As the series executive producer Ira Steven Behr stated in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, we wanted to give these guys something special. I couldn't make them the toughest guys in the galaxy, that's the Jem'Hadar, or the most arrogant guys, that's the Cardassians, or the most untrustworthy guys, that's the Vorta. So we decided to make them the most mysterious guys in the galaxy. A lot of the mystery has finally been revealed with the showcasing of the two-faced Breen, i.e. solid and fluid, via the character of Locke in Star Trek Discovery's 5th and final season. Nevertheless, the essence of the Breen remains shrouded in mystery. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are 10 things we now know about the Breen. Number 10. Not to be indiscreet, but may I have your helmet? Before Kira and Dukat were nabbing kit and caboodle on Dozaria, the Breen were introduced to Star Trek in the episode The Loss by a mention by Data. Indeed, there are many races that are not emphatically detectable. The Breen, the Ferengi, the android would say. Star Trek's most enigmatic race would then be nodded to again in the episode Hero Worship, again in Interface, and in Star Trek Generations. It was the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Indiscretion that marked the Breen's debut appearance on screen. Although, in that episode, Kira and Dukat made short time about kidnapping and stripping down a couple of Breen, though we would still, as an audience, not be treated to their lovely faces in that episode, nor again when Kira would take a Breen uniform later on in the show's 7th season, but more on that later. In reality, and like most things in life, the Breen's enigmatic nature was born out of exhaustion. This, according to executive producer Ira Steven Behr in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine companion, was partly because the episode Indiscretion came on the heels of multi-actor makeup episodes like The Way of the Warrior. I wasn't really in the mood to come up with a new alien race, so I said, let's not see them. Let's put them in costume because they normally live in the cold. Probably the only reason the Breen initially donned the helmet, or that they were in Indiscretion at all, according to Robert Hewitt Wolfe, was simply because we needed a bad guy in this episode, so we just chucked the Breen in there. Number 9. The mechanics of mechanical nursery rhymes. Until recently, the Breen have always spoken, well, Breen, and their tinny shrillness was never translated for the viewer. With the right adjustments to the universal translator so that it could handle the syntax, Breen language could be understood by characters on screen. Those characters would then reply in normal Federation standard, which would sometimes lead to a couple of funny back and forths, like in the Cardassian War Room on Cardassia Prime. It appears to be a simple Breen nursery rhyme, Odo says, via holographic transmission to Captain Sisko on the Defiant in For the Uniform. It's a heterophonic 5-line verse, he continues. Metrical analysis shows an alternating tetrameter and pentameter structure. We might have different definitions of simple, Odo. Odo's poetry verse was actually the first time we heard Breen spoken on screen, if you don't count the grunting and possible death rattles of the guards that Kira and Dukat took on. When it came to the iconic Breen sound, which would feature prominently in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Ira Steven Behr stated that they decided to give the species voices that really grate on the audience, like Lou Reed's Metal Machine Music album, which is basically 2 hours of feedback guaranteed to drive you insane. In fact, Behr instructed the sound design team to listen to that album while creating the Breen noise. It's worth noting that in Star Trek Deep Space Nine's 5th season, Locke has predominantly spoken Federation standard to, let's be honest, give our ears a bit of a break. For the very first time in the episode Erika, we hear Vance and Burnham listening to the Universal Translator translating Breen into Federation standard as they listen to the warning from the approaching Breen dreadnought. Later, when Primarch Rune appears via a giant holographic head, he is speaking in his natural tongue, but someone is translating in Federation HQ. When Rune beams into Federation HQ, he speaks in his natural tongue and has one of his underlings translate, although President Tarina displays that she knows full well what Rune was really saying, prompting the Primarch to switch to Federation standard. The rest that we know about the Breen language is pretty much all nursery rhymes and metal machines. Number 8. See how they run. The Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode By Inferno's Light introduced us to the Romulans saying, "Never turn your back on a Breen." That the Romulans and the Jem'Hadar learned the hard way. During the Second Empire, according to Worf in Till Death Do Us Part, the Klingons sent a fleet of ships to Breen space to conquer their homeworld, and they were never heard from again. In fact, many Alpha Quadrant races would end up on the run from the Breen as they entered as a late-stage belligerent in the Dominion War. News is always the most chilly when it must be delivered matter-of-factly. We have received a Priority 1 message from Starfleet Command. The Breen have attacked Earth. Colonel Kira delivers the news to Sisko over the intercom, and our worlds were turned upside down. This was our true introduction to the Breen as part of the Dominion War, as Dominion allies, leaving much of San Francisco and the Golden Gate Bridge as a smouldering wreck. If they'd been on better terms at that time, perhaps the Klingons would have been green with envy. The Breen followed that up with a devastating assault on Federation forces in the Chintaka system. This was a deadly attack for the Defiant, and in total 311 Federation, Klingon and Romulan ships that were destroyed, having had all of their energy removed via the Breen's energy dissipating weapon. The target vessels were almost immediately drained of power, save for one Klingon ship, the Katang, leaving the crews to limp home in escape pods, completely demoralized. The Breen Interceptor, used in that and several more episodes, was designed by the legendary John Eaves. He had received a brief that the ship should be asymmetrical, which he delivered in spades. We've also learned from Tuvok in the episode Scorpion that Breen ships are at least part organic. Data even suggested that Breen ships had cloaking technology as well back in the Next Generation. If the 24th century Breen ships weren't enough for you, we've now been introduced as well to the massive Breen Dreadnought vessel that arrived at Federation HQ in the episode Erika. This is also the same massive vessel that was shown to have destroyed Federation HQ in a possible future in the episode Face the Strange. Number 7. Conflab Imperium. Aside from the face reveal and the fact that they all have that one uncle, we've learned a lot about the Breen in Star Trek Discovery's 5th season. In the 24th century, the Breen were a confederacy who did the odd deal with Ferengi and then tried to take over the Alpha Quadrant. By the 32nd century, though, thanks to President Tarina's information in Red Directive, we discover that the Breen have formed an Imperium and are frankly a pain in the neck to all surrounding species. From the episode Erika, we realized that the Breen Imperium is now made up of several warring Primarchs who are battling for control over the Empire after the death of the Emperor. President Tarina reveals that there had been no official contact with the Breen since before the burn, and of course Vance revealed that the last time the Breen entered Federation space, it had been a disaster for the Federation. As Tilly said, they came in and destroyed an entire city. In Mirrors, Primarch Rune confirmed the infighting when he was chastising Lak for spending his time with Maul. That is, of course, the episode in which we learned that Lak was of royal descent via an insignia on his belt, although he was not in good favor, having been demoted to shuttle bay duty. Of course, in Face the Strange, in that possible future, we discovered that the Breen had managed to overcome Federation HQ and, presumably, the rest of Starfleet as well. Raynor, Burnham, and Zora were not exactly thrilled by this, as Raynor realized that the Breen must have been Maul and Locke's highest bidders. And just in case you weren't sure that the Breen weren't exactly friendly, in Erika we'll realize that the Breen had once used Kelleran as a musician's resupply hub, basically devastating the planet just to make their travel through the cosmos a little bit handier. Raynor, not a fan. Number 6. See how they rune? What's Erika got to do with it? One question finally came to a close in the episode Mirrors, when Burnham realizes, having heard the word Erika, that Locke must be Breen. And seeing as we managed to see what was under a Breen's helmet and survive, the real discussion can begin. And Erika is a Breen blood bounty. They're after you, aren't they? Burnham asks Locke and Maul as they stand on the ISS in Mirrors. Now that we know that the Imperium and that one really angry uncle are after Maul and Locke, we also know via the episode Erika that Rune isn't the only one who's probably after Locke, because holding Locke means holding the scion of the Emperor in your palm. In the final flashback in Mirrors, we see that the Erika is placed on Locke and Maul after Locke shoots 2 of his compatriot Breen guards and then also his really annoying uncle, all in the name of helping Maul escape. An Erika is impossible to lift. They'll never stop hunting me, Locke tells Maul before he's convinced to go on the run with her. They then hope that billions of years old progenitors tech will be enough to buy their freedom, which is, let's be real, probably not the strangest thing we've heard in Star Trek in the last couple of weeks, let alone anything else. It turns out in the episode Erika, when Burnham really figures it out who Locke is, that Locke is a direct descendant of the deceased Emperor, and without him, Rune has a much weaker claim to the throne. As Burnham says, this was never about Locke. This was about power. Number 5. Breen there, done that. After Deep Space Nine and before Star Trek Discovery, the Breen appeared on our screens only 2 more times. One of those times was in holographic form as one of the Hirogen's creation in the Voyager episode Flesh and Blood. The Intrepid-class ship had effectively skipped the entire Dominion War by being stranded in the Delta Quadrant, so the audience had probably seen far more of the Breen than the crew of Voyager had at that stage. The Breen were introduced on screen in late 1995, whereas Voyager was flung to the Delta Quadrant in early 1995. I'm of course speaking in our calendar here. That's not continuity breaking or anything, it's a bit like kind of keep everything in track, because Voyager starts in 2371, whereas that episode of Deep Space Nine is in 2372. Breenception. The Breen's second appearance outside Deep Space Nine was in the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Trusted Sources, where the Kali class beams several people down to Brekka only to be ambushed by the Breen, with the California class being ambushed by 3 Breen interceptors in space. A while before the Breen's third post-DS9 appearance, in 2018, Effects Department head Glenn Hetrick took part in a Facebook Live with his colleague Neville Page. In reply to a fan question, Hetrick stated the following: "I want the Breen to eventually be in Discovery 2. I want to get one of those refrigeration suits off and see what the Breen looked like." It seems they've Breen on the brain for some time. Number 4. Tufex's Factor, the sequel. Unless they had their eyes closed the whole time, Kira and Dukat must have seen what the Breen looked like when they took their uniforms in Indiscretion, and Kira doubly so when she took another Breen uniform in What You Leave Behind. According to Worf, however, in Till Death Do Us Part, no one has ever seen what's under a Breen's helmet and lived. In the DS9 companion book, Ronald D. Moore stated that really, that's just one of those continuity things that slipped through the cracks. There was so much going on at the time. Ira Stephen Bear, on the other hand, gave a surprising, more in-universe justification. There's nothing in those helmets. Or maybe there's a little slug, some tiny little creature in there. I never wanted them to be humanoid in any way. Or we could go with First Assistant Director Lou Race's explanation. I always figured they must look like Donald Duck, because of the beak. Thankfully, none of those options came to pass, and you couldn't ask for a more enthusiastic first face of the Breen than Elias Tufexis. Tufexis is a lifelong Star Trek fan, so his unfettered enthusiasm seeps through his performance. In an interview with Cinema Blend's Mike Jost, he explained the feeling upon seeing the concept art for Locke for the first time. I said, "What is he?" And they said, "Oh, he's gonna be a Breen." And I was like, Breen don't take their helmets off? That was the first thing I said. That's how much of a nerd I am. Are you telling me I'm gonna be the first Breen that takes his helmet off? Tufexis has made Star Trek history, and he's just as excited as the rest of us would be. Locke level unlocked. Number 3. Suits you, 2. Before Locke, no Breen had ever not been suited and booted on screen in Star Trek. The DS9 companion suggested that the original design for the Breen assumed that they would be a snouted species, a bit like an Arctic fox. The headpiece then would allow space for a muzzle. Now, whilst they were visually impressive, the costumes did provide several issues for the poor actors stuck inside them. As Assistant Director B.C. Cameron stated in the DS9 companion, the problem was the people in the costumes cannot see, they cannot breathe, they're wearing big, clumsy boots, and their outfits are layered like an armadillo, making it very hard for them to move. Some of these restrictions caused unintentionally comedic moments. Like, for example, in the episode Strange Bedfellows, when Breen performer Wade Kelly couldn't see, walked into a wall, and tripped over the edge of a doorway. They made us sound a bit like the Tin Man falling over in The Wizard of Oz, quipped director René Auberjonois. Over time, the refrigeration suits have been streamlined. Gone now is the extended mouthpiece, as we know that underneath them there is a flatter face there, although what remains is the iconic green eyepiece across the top. Now that we've seen what's underneath the Breen helmet, we can start to wonder what the bloody hell they need those refrigeration suits for to begin with. We are slowly getting some answers. Number 2. Cold Day in Xenobiology 101. Even in the 32nd century, there can't be much under the entry Breen in Dr. McCoy's revised comparative alien physiology textbook. After all, Captain Burnham was surprised to hear of Locke's Breen origins, and no one else in Starfleet seemed to recognize him as a Breen either. What we do know about Breen physiology we've pieced together along the way. Aside from Data's revelation that they are not empathically detectable in the Next Generation, we discovered via Bashir, the real one, not the changing one, in Purgatory's Shadow, that the Breen or at least that Breen in captivity, have no blood. In the 32nd century, in the episode Mirrors, when Locke is impaled in the ISS sickbay, he does seem to, I'm going to use the word bleed for a second, but we just don't know that it's blood. Is this something that only becomes apparent when the Breen take solid form? Furthermore, Burnham's translation of blood bounty may have been a sort of a loose approximation of the word, and then later on in Eriga, the Doctor does state that Locke's O2 saturation levels are dropping. In humans, anyway, that means blood. And in the same episode, Primarch Rune states that the only payment for a blood bounty is blood. Dr. Culber admitted the Federation's ignorance on the matter, but we did learn that Breen physiology is reactive to tricordrazine. So more hopped up than McCoy hopping through the Guardian of Forever, let's say he takes a little bit too much in this episode. One of the most enduring things about Breen physiology is the ever-present refrigeration suits. As mentioned earlier, Ira Stephen Bear's rationale for this was that the species lived in the cold. If anyone knows how to keep things cold, it's the Breen, Sisko would say in For the Uniform, whereas that relative certainty was upended by a certain little Vorta later on. In the episode The Changing Face of Evil, Weyoun has the following exchange with Damar. I'm sure you've read the intelligence reports that say their homeworld is a frozen wasteland. Well, it's not. The climate on their planet is quite comfortable. Then why do they wear refrigeration suits? They won't say. They're full of surprises. That they most definitely are. From Eriga, Dr. Culber goes at least partially away toward explaining why the Breen use these refrigeration suits. Dr. Culber, having done a deep dive into Dominion-era medical research, discovered some evidence that the Breen are capable of somatic cell regeneration in extreme cold. Culber also located a Breen refrigeration unit in storage, proving that, once again, the Breen do use these refrigeration suits. He planned to convert it into an ICU biobed for something of a slapdash refrigeration ICU bed. Technically, that means that both Sisko and Weyoun can be correct. They may not have to be in refrigeration suits, but they certainly benefit from them. Indeed, before the accidental overdose of tricordrazine, Locke did seem to be bouncing back thanks to Culber's refrigeration bed. In Culber's words, sub-zero gases promote a strong immune response in the Breen, which helps them to heal. Although the somewhat strange-looking organ that Culber is scanning holographically a bit before that, what that does, anyone's guess. Number 1, fluid dynamics. Within 10 minutes of the beginning of Star Trek Discovery's 5th season premiere, Red Directive, Mal and Locke were introduced to us, and we'd seen both the fluidic CGI face of Locke and the solid prosthetic face. We didn't realize it, but we'd also just seen the two faces of the Breen for the first time. It wasn't, however, until the later episode Mirrors that we would start to understand the uses for these two faces in the Breen. We're generally calling them the fluid face and the solid face. In one of the flashbacks, Locke finally shows Mal his fluid face, although he appears deeply uncomfortable doing so, stating that it's not him. After Mal points out that all aspects of him are him, he removes his helmet and we see his fluidic face again. This is pure speculation, but we think that the refrigeration suits allow the Breen to hold that fluidic shape while within the suit. Without the suit, do they very quickly turn solid? And we're not talking solid versus liquid either, but more like solid versus Bose-Einstein, or even fermionic condensate. Now that's cold. When Locke's uncle arrives, he reveals his fluidic face as well and states rather emphatically, "This is Breen." Uncle Rune goes on to state that Locke's holding of a solid form is an insult to his heritage. Heritage in this case means the genetic code of the Yod Thot, or those who rule. For Rune, at least, the Breen have evolved beyond their need to hold a solid form, as, in his words, it leaves him unfocused, inflexible, and weak. Locke gives a spirited defense, stating that both faces are part of them, and if they deny part of them, they deny all of them. It's a good defense, but there's not many people picking it up. Ultimately, as we saw in Eriga, Locke's choice to remain in solid form flies in the face of other Breen, particularly his dastardly uncle. Added to that, the marriage that he enters into with Mal via the branding on their arms is called an abomination by Rune as well. Now that he's dead, the progenitor's tech may be Locke and Mal's only hope. Long live Locke. That is everything for our list, folks. We will update this as we go on because The clues in the title, it's things we now know about the Breen. Thank you so much, Jack Kiley, for putting together this list. This is a deep dive and you're a legend. Thank you so much everyone for watching along. You are wonderful, you are awesome. Please don't forget to follow us on all the various socials on TrekCulture. You can follow me at Sean Ferrick on the various socials. Follow Jack at Jack Kiley 74656, and you can of course follow the wonderful Tom at Tom C. Finn or at Tom Roberts Finn as well. You are awesome, you are great, live long and prosper, and we will see you soon. Thanks very much.